Welcome to this webinar, which is so-called "Why is it not enough to simply install Microsoft Teams?" My name is Jens Baxtermüller. I'm your host today on this webinar, and I'm followed by my former colleagues Andreas Dumpfahrt, who is our expert in Microsoft Teams, and Nico Schulze, who is an expert on digital team management. And for the beginning of this webinar, I will start with 4 different theses. Why is it not simply enough to just install Microsoft Teams? So in the first thesis, I wrote the following. A second crisis within 5 years from now might destabilize your business once again. And what I'm going to say with that is just to sit out the crisis might not work out for you. And another thesis could be your competitors might be adapted to the new work ethic within and after COVID-19 and will leave you behind, which means they could come out stronger after the crisis. And like you can see today, we have not even longer offline events. We have digital events online, like we had this week on Tuesday, the Digital Summit. And maybe in the near future, you will have hybrid events, local and online. So that might be a thesis too, to just get more involved in this. The third thesis, which we stated there, is we implemented Microsoft Teams and now it's chaos within the tool. Perhaps you're looking for more training or best practices. So if that's the case, you're right in this webinar. We have some very nice tips and tool tips for you. And last but not least, the fourth thesis, Microsoft Teams has now too many channels, and I never know where I've stored my important documents. And this comes from creating new teams throughout the whole group, and there's no guideline and no right path which to follow. So if so, how to do this? These are typical questions we receive a lot from our customers. And in this webinar, we will give you a few steps which might help you.
Thank you. Yeah, as Jens already said, the first step is the setup and technology. We have some basic setup as well, of course, for Microsoft Teams, even if it's a cloud solution to do. But I want also to give you some basic insight on the background of Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Teams, what's actually used in the background as a services. So you have a basic understanding what's the technology behind Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365. So if we switch to the next slide, the first topic would be generally understanding of the digital workplace. The 3 main topics of it are, as we're using cloud services, the location independency. So you can use it from any kind of location, from your office, from your home office, especially in the current situation, and of course from different other places independent where going. You can use it on different devices, so you can use it on your smartphone, a tablet, or a personal computer, of course. And it's time independent, so you can use it actually anytime, and there's no restriction on if you have to work between 9 and 5, or you can still access your data during the night. But yeah, so in the next slide, we have the basic architecture of the Microsoft 365 platform or Microsoft Cloud platform overall. I broke it down to the most basic understanding because there are, of course, plenty of services, plenty of hardware infrastructure as well involved, and other basic services. So I broke it down to 3 steps. The first one is the Microsoft Azure infrastructure. So even with Microsoft 365, we are still talking about tools and services in the Microsoft Azure cloud. And the first step is the data center, so the hardware itself, and Azure services for network connectivity, for databases where you store all your data you put in the cloud, and stuff like that. On the second level, we have the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which is your identity management. That means it's managing your user accounts, your email addresses, your passwords, your settings for multi-factor authentication and stuff like that, which is of course the basic functionality you need to even access Microsoft 365, which we defined on the third level, where we have all these Microsoft services like Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, your Office applications in the cloud, and other stuff like that. So how do we get now to use Microsoft 365? There are some basic steps as well involved to even get there. You could just sign up for Microsoft 365, but we always recommend to do steps first to get up some basic usage and make it easier for the user. And the first one is to have the Azure Active Directory set up, the identity management, as we heard in the previous slide, but which also can be connected or should be connected to your local Active Directory infrastructure. So you can use the same username and the same password as you use on your local computer as well in the cloud. And if you change it in one place, it's automatically changed in the other place as well. So that makes it easier to use all the tools of Microsoft 365 for the end user. The second step is then Exchange Online, which means you put all your mailboxes, Outlook calendars and stuff like that into the cloud. Why should we do that? Because some services depend on it, like Microsoft Flow or Microsoft Power Automate, as it's called today, is highly dependent to send emails and approval requests and stuff like that on Exchange Online. And of course, there are also some integration with Microsoft Teams, like the calendar integration and the meeting organization, which is dependent on Outlook. So the third step then could be to use Microsoft or introduce Microsoft Teams for collaboration and communication in your company. When we are now looking in detail on Microsoft Teams, we are talking about the 5 basic functionalities, like the file storage, the chat functionality, Teams, meetings, and calls, where we have some dependency on other functionality of Office 365 or Microsoft 365 in use. Because if you want to share a file in a chat or in a group chat, you always use OneDrive in the background where the file is uploaded and stored while you prepare it or provide it to a different, to one of your colleagues or an external partner or so on. And if you use a Teams room, a Teams space, you're always in the background using as well SharePoint for file storage, for storage of the wikis, and other stuff like that. Let's say you integrate OneNote in your Microsoft Teams, you're also storing that OneNote on SharePoint. So it's not like Microsoft Teams is a platform on its own, but it's highly dependent on other tools. And as well for meetings, you on the one hand have the calendar integration of Exchange, which is used to organize meetings and which can help you only managing one calendar instead of having a separate calendar for Microsoft Teams and a separate calendar for all your Outlook calendar entries and Outlook meetings on the customer sites and stuff like that. And we also have the Microsoft Stream in the background, which is the icon on the bottom right. You can see, if you don't know it, it's used for video streaming and also for the video recording inside Microsoft Teams. So if you want to record one of your meetings, your online meetings, the video is stored in Microsoft Streams in the background. So far for the technical background, we can now have a look at the basic setup steps for Microsoft Teams. So we have 3 steps. It seems rather simple. The first one is to configure Microsoft Teams, which means on the server side, you still have some configuration you can do to configure who can set up new teams, if there's any regulation on what kind of teams he can set up, or if there's a basic structure and stuff like that, and what features he can use inside Microsoft Teams. So it's highly recommended to not use the standard, but review those settings and change them accordingly. The second step would be to configure sharing settings, which involves changing some settings for SharePoint Online and OneDrive. So you can regulate from a management and company perspective how people in your organization can share files with external people, like only sending invitations for specific people and not creating a link that can be used by pretty much anybody who has an internet access anywhere in the world. And the third step would be the setup of the Teams client and the actual final rollout of Microsoft Teams to your employees.
Thank you, Andreas. Really nice input on the first step on our staircase here. So one quick question: if I'm gonna use Microsoft Teams, do I really need additionally the OneDrive and SharePoint?
Yes, you really need it because of the file storage you have, and there's actually no license that you can license Teams completely on your own. You always have some kind of storage space, some specific amount. It could be 2 GB, it could be 10 or more, depending on the license, included for OneDrive and SharePoint, so you can actually store files. There's no way to use Microsoft Teams without those other tools. So if you remove OneDrive access, you can't really use Microsoft Teams file sharing in a chat functionality.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And here you were talking about the setup steps. Would you just say those simple steps are enough, or would you recommend even more to do with this? Yeah.
Those setup steps are the first step, which you can, of course, or which you should do, but it's not all of what you need to do. That's the basic installation, as we would call it. But there, of course, should be some kind of further steps we will now talk about in our next step, the usage and know-how part of the session. So when we switch to the next slide. The next slide would be some highlights of what can happen when you don't properly introduce Microsoft Teams to your employees and only try to install it and give the application more or less to employees and tell them, here's Microsoft Teams, go on and use it. You're taking a big risk of having issues like the ones lined out on this slide, like the dispersed resources when we start at the top, with issues like having the tools used differently by different departments and different parts of the organization. So some people prefer to use the chat functionality and group chats and share files via OneDrive. Others use Microsoft Teams, and people create the Microsoft team for everything they actually need, and after a while you have a lot of Microsoft Teams which only contain a handful of files and are not used for several months. And of course all of that increases IT support, because somebody has to take care of that. Somebody has to reassign permissions if there's somebody leaving the company and files are somewhere lost in a Microsoft team. You have an increase in onboarding time, because when somebody new starts in the organization, you have to give them access to every single team they could need for their daily work and stuff like that. And there's also this part of solutions for mobile workers. With the current time we have that many people work from home, there is a requirement to have more remote access functionality for new employees, and to give them access on their own devices if they don't have a corporate phone and stuff like that. And of course, it's always comes with a large amount of effort when you want to set up VPN clients and VPN access for people. So they try to use easier solutions like Microsoft Teams and just start putting files on Microsoft Teams and on the Microsoft Cloud, which maybe you don't want them to put in Microsoft Teams because they contain sensitive data, or they are now duplicated with a local storage and Microsoft Teams storage and stuff like that, which makes it hard to administer all of this. And this could lead to the third-party apps problem and file sharing problem outlined in the next part on the bottom left, with no control of shared files. So you don't really know what your employees actually shared with others. There might be links outside in the whole wide world where everybody can access some files. So you can lose files to third parties, maybe to competitions, or maybe to just some people who share them publicly on the internet, which you don't want to happen. And there could also be some third-party apps used in parts of your organization, which from a management perspective and a IT perspective, you don't know about. And also problems with, of course, versions of documents, as I already said, with different storages. You have a version on the local network drive inside the organization, which you used previously, and somebody copied the same file to the Microsoft Cloud, and somebody else downloaded it and sent it via email, and then you end up with multiple versions of the same file, which are hard to handle because you don't know which is the right version, which contains the latest data. And the first step to help you with issues like that is a proper training of your employee. So Microsoft Teams is pretty easy to understand how to use it. Chat functionality, calls functionality. I mean, anybody knows some kind of chat application on their smartphone. But the training is not only about how to get to know how to handle it or how to use it, but also how to use it correctly and efficiently. So how to know when to use a group chat, when to better create a new team, when to set up a meeting with internal, external people, where to put the files correctly, put it in Microsoft Teams, in a chat, in the OneDrive, or in SharePoint, or on a previous other file storage location, and stuff like that. And what can easily help with all this training is a champions program, which means you select some part of the organization, some single persons from the organization, train them properly to work as champions, and they help you during a pilot phase where you try to understand the use cases for that application and define the use cases, which then can be rolled out to the employees. So the champions can also help you with the communication to the employees to tell them correctly how to use Microsoft Teams. Champions can also help you with support, that they go into the different departments, show the people how to use it, answer questions if the employees don't know how to use a specific feature, that they don't have to contact IT support, but also can directly discuss with the champions and discuss also how to use the features properly with their current requirements. And of course, for constant improvement, because Microsoft Teams is changing all the time with new functionality, you have to be up to date with that new functionality, and the champions can tackle that requirement, introduce the new functionality to the rest of the people inside the organization, and the IT guys, the IT department, can focus on other topics than Microsoft Teams support. The really important factors which we should take from this chapter are to select the target audiences, or define the target audiences and their use cases for Microsoft Teams, to select the correct key users and champions, to get feedback from the people on a regular basis, so you know, do they have any change requests, any additional requirements where you could use a third-party application in Microsoft Teams, to train them correctly, to try to constantly improve the environment, and of course to evaluate the usage as well, so you know which department is correctly using Microsoft Teams and where is some space for improvement in other departments.
Thanks, Andreas. I really like the idea of this champion program. Therefore, I have a quick question: which people would you recommend to pick for one of these programs?
Yeah. Best is to have one or two champions in each department of the organization. So there's in every department is somebody available. But of course, it should be especially it should be people who have a motivation to use new technology, who have some kind of know-how already with new technology systems, and are interested in using those new technologies and adapting their processes they have in that department to use with those new tools and stuff like that. Not only the people who have the most experience, like in the company already 20 years and know the process and best, but more the people who are willing to adopt to new technologies. When we now have all the training done and people know how to use it, we have our champions. We should focus on the next part to tell the people how to properly organize their daily work in Microsoft Teams. So when we view or when we look at Microsoft Teams organization, we could view it or could imagine a desk where we have different chat functionality and group chats, which are now my coffee cup and our, usually our kitchen where some people are standing around and drinking coffee and chatting. Then we have our teams and channels where we more or less organize the daily work in different groups and different, conversation channels. Then we have, of course, the document storage inside Microsoft Teams, which is required that we organize it properly. Otherwise, we will end up in chaos and don't find any documents we need. But we also should think about the visibility and archiving. So not only to organize the documents correctly, but also archive them when you don't need them anymore. And the same goes for teams and channels. Think about removing all teams, archiving all teams, so the user only sees the ones really important for him. And of course, also there are third-party apps and stuff like bots and so on you can integrate in Microsoft Teams, which can bring new functionality to the Teams environment. When we think about teams and channels, there's also the Teams lifecycle we should think about with 3 steps: the creation, the usage, and the deletion or archiving of teams. Creation means thinking about predefined structures, templates you can create in Microsoft Teams and reuse for new teams. So like in a project setup where you always want to have a project look like other projects as well, so people find the files and stuff and information inside a project directly and don't need to search for it too long. There could be an approval process as well for creation of new teams, and you can define an expiration date. Let's say your projects usually take up to 6 months, then it could be a good idea to set up an expiration date and an archiving policy after that expiration for your project teams from the start. Usage, of course, is about the correct usage and the efficient usage of Microsoft Teams. And in the end of the life cycle, we try to delete or archive all teams if we don't need them anymore. When we then look on file storage guidelines, we should think about, on the next slide, thank you, about different file storage options. We usually have the one at the bottom left. There's always some network drives in an organization, maybe other storage solutions, you already have. But with Microsoft 365, you're now introducing in Microsoft Teams, you're introducing OneDrive, you're introducing Microsoft Teams and SharePoint in your organization, and should think about file storage guidelines so people know where to put what files, so that they know how to handle sensitive data, to store it on network drives because it shouldn't go anywhere in the cloud if you want that like this. To use OneDrives, especially for personal files, for short time storage or sharing of files with other coworkers and with externals. To use Microsoft Teams mainly in a project setup and in smaller teams, and collaboration between different departments where Microsoft Teams is really strong in functionality. But on the other hand, as well, SharePoint for long-time storage and sharing of documents from one department to other departments, like an HR department, providing information about regulations and policies to the rest of the organization. That's for file sharing. When we then think about communication, we also should think about communication guidelines so people know which tool to use for communication. From the past, we always were used to emails and phone calls. Now we have Microsoft Teams and even maybe Yammer as a social intranet available, and we should define which tool people should prefer to use for the Intel communication. On the left side, you can see the time sensitivity, which could be low or high, depending on how important and how fast the response is required. On the bottom, we have the target audience with the individual person or single persons. Then we have teams, departments, organization, worldwide communication, which could also be outside the organization. And then we can define, this is an example on what kind of channel to use for that communication. It could be that for internal communication, people should use the chat and call functionality in Microsoft Teams. For the communication inside a team, they could use the Microsoft Teams channels. For departments, they could split the communication between Yammer and Microsoft Teams, depending on the goal they want to achieve in the communication, and so on.
Yeah, and now I'm welcoming Nico for the next part, the digital team management. Nico, the stage is yours.
Hello, also from my side. Good afternoon. My name is Nico. I'm a business psychologist, and I'm taking over the human side on digital transformation. And of course, every implementation of technology has got a huge impact on your team, on your culture, and on your leadership. And today I'm going to show you one way on how to handle these issues based on Microsoft Teams and the technology itself. So we're also going to do and run a demo together, which you could then apply and copy afterwards. Don't worry about writing anything on notes or etc., because this is going to be recorded and going to be sent to you as well afterwards. So just relax, gather the ideas, and ask some questions. So let's jump into it straight away and ask ourselves, what are the actual reasons of why digital collaboration fails? And we spoke with our main clients about their obstacles they're currently facing, and there was some kind of a structure in it. And they said that in the beginning it's usually pretty hard to have some clear targets, particularly when your team is divided into several chapters and then they are not in the office, so they're mainly working now via remote. So it's not that easy to talk and chat within the office face-to-face anymore. So the targets, and then, okay, what does it mean for me? What's the implication for me as a member, becomes very, very shadowed, so to speak. So unclear targets is number one. The second is, even when you have some targets, doesn't matter if it's for the whole quarter or for the week, then what about the tasks which are correlated with the targets? It's pretty hard to follow who's actually doing what and what's the current status and who's working together for which task. So that's pretty hard to follow when people are working digitally together. And it doesn't matter if it's during Corona crisis or if it's just the rise of home office, or if it's just in the digital age itself. So that's pretty difficult. And thirdly, of course, if you don't have a collaboration tool at all, such as Microsoft Teams, as we just showed to you, then it becomes really difficult, because only managing digital collaboration via mails or phones with a digital working team is nearly impossible. Maybe you've already tried it before you had the collaboration tool, or you had to do it before Corona. And fourthly, and very surprisingly, is the fact that there isn't a focus on an awareness for running retros. So having the importance on saving the success sustainably. So doing retros means that you jump into the team and ask yourself what went wrong, what went good, and what are our success stories. But I'll tell you a little bit more right now. So what could be potential solutions for the 4 steps? So firstly, for the unclear targets, we would recommend that you rather apply so-called agile goals. So traditional goals are used for yearly planning, so to speak, but it wouldn't be that good to apply for the team to manage it. Why? Because it would be very hard to adapt flexibly to the changing environment, right? If it's just focused on a whole year. So I bet when you would have set yourself goals for the last year, then of course, due to Corona, you would have changed it, must have changed it immediately. So why not doing it all the time? Hence, we would recommend you do some quarterly targets. For that, you would then have a frame on which you could then focus on. So you could run some sprints. You have the distinct focus and commitment from your team. And we apply OKR, so objective and key results for it. I'll show you a little bit today in the tutorial, but hang on, in the next webinar, I'm going to dedicate like 10 minutes or so for explaining, also showing how the system really works. So secondly, for the intransparent and unclear task management, we would also encourage you to use some sort of agile working style. So usually what you would do is like a to-do list or waterfall procedure. This is, again, very hard if you are in a digital working environment, because you normally need to reprioritize pretty heavily. And also it's difficult to see where the status is and if somebody is collaborating with you or not. And also, where are the obstacles? How can you improve your working style? How you can improve your efficiency if it's not visible at all where you're stuck at the moment? And also, where's the moment of success with your team, with you as well, if you're only making some crosses in your to-do list, right? So that's really un-agile and not digital. Okay, you can do it with a digital app, then it's digital, but you know what I mean. Now I'm going to show you how you could do it in another way, just as an example, as a best practice. And of course, if you don't have a digital collaboration tool, then I bet after Andreas' presentation today, you're quite sure to install it. I hope so, because this is just the basic you should have in order to be successful in the digital age. If you don't have it, then you don't have the basis for it in order to work together, chat together, call together, or even have your data available for everybody. And finally, retro comes from looking into the past, not to be changed with running a business review. Review only looks at the results and asks how were the results, how did you perform. But the retro is similarly important and looks how well have you worked together in order to achieve that goal. And this is a way how to reflect on your working style, on your culture, on your team culture, and then learn out of it, create some winning strategies for the next time, and then do a retro again. We would recommend doing it after every quarter, so after every time frame when you have set yourself some goals. All right, great. So as promised, for the next maybe 5 minutes or so, I'm going to show you something, a framework which you could then rebuild if you like. So I will quickly stop the presentation here. And so don't be surprised, now you can see my screen. And here you should see now the Microsoft Planner web application. It's pretty easy to use it. Just create a new plan over here. Here's the Planner Hub where you would have an overview of all of your created plans. And I'm now in the digital team board for our English attendees. So this is like a demo version, but it is actually based on real data, which we have used in June 2020. And before I'm going to show you every card and what it means, let me just introduce it to the overview. So of course it looks a little bit busy, but everything has got a system. And first of all, what is important is to see that we are thinking in different lists. So this is a list, this is the list, and Microsoft tends to use the name buckets for it. So it doesn't matter how you would like to name it. And why so? Because every list shows you a different status of your task. This is also called like a Kanban flow. Maybe you've already heard about it. And this is like a flow because we're reading it from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. But before I'm going to show you all of the lists and what it means, let's start on the left-hand side. So usually when you have created some targets for your team and with your team members, where do you place the results? Is it in the Excel file? Is it in a Word document or somewhere else? But why so? Only because you've then written it out. Yes, of course, that's helpful because it makes it more, it raises the commitment. But what would be better is to make it visible every week, because of course you want to relate your tasks to your targets, don't you? Because you want to achieve the target. So that's why we would recommend placing your targets every week in front of your team members. And that's why the The first list here is dedicated to the goals actually, and we apply the OKR system. As said, in the next webinar, I'm going to show you a little bit more about the system and how to roll it out in the whole organization. And you can see that it's split into objectives and key results. And an objective is like a status in the future which you would like to achieve, and that's like the goal for you. So we had the status with the product digital team management. We have created added value for our customers. That's what we wanted to achieve. And now the question, how could we achieve it? That's why we then have the key results here in the checklist. And the key results are like the tactical steps in order to achieve this objective, but it's also measurable so that you have an indication where you currently stand and if you have achieved it or not. So that's why we tend to use numbers here. So if we would have created 3 different channels to promote the product or not, so you could see if you were able to only achieve 2 or 4 and so on. And this is like the so-called OKR set here. This is like one OKR set, and it's recommended to have like between 2 to 4 OKR set per theme. So now we have like one theme here, which is in green, and then you could have like, I don't know, other themes for the customer service or other themes, depending on your department, right? So just for presentation purpose here, we only have like one OKR set. So we have the target on the left-hand side, and we're planning these every quarter, so 4th time per year. One planning 2 to 3 hours, then we have the focus set for the next quarter. And then per week, that's why here's the list called week, we would then plan on Monday morning the key results and the task according to the key results. So the next key result here is, in order to achieve our quarterly goal, is the key result 2, right? So that's why we focus then on key result 2 here. And now we ask ourselves, what must we do in order to achieve this key result here? And you can see that there is a checklist again. So this is our status in order to achieve this key result, 7 out of 12. So we click into it, and there we had really like a plan here with some tasks which were already done. And now we can see like there are some tasks still open, and these are our tasks for the next week we would then have planned. So that's what we're doing in the second list here. It's where we then plan the whole week, and that's why it's called backlog, because those tasks haven't been touched yet, so they're not in progress. You can see that there is a list here with 0 out of 3. And these are really like the tasks out of the list over here. And on the next list, you can see which tasks are already in progress, so that your team members could then see, okay, these are already in progress, and also your team lead can see it. And here is a list where awaiting response is still necessary, like something like a discussion or something like anything that needs to be controlled on it, read over it, or anything else. So you can see that 12 out of 13 tasks are already accomplished, but 1 is missing because you need some feedback. And that's important why you would dedicate it to another list, because this team member here, it's either me here, Nico, or Andreas, my colleague, they have done everything what was necessary from their side to achieve this task, but now it's not dependent anymore on them. It's dependent on the supervisor, Garrett. So that's why it's here on this list. It's good for the overview. Otherwise, it would be a mess to differentiate where do we still have to do something and where not, if you know what I mean. So what's also really important is here you can see that there is a file. So this is like really, really cool and useful, that particularly when you're working with different people together on one task, so it's great for collaboration. Then you can plan yourself. So you can see that this was done for me, this was for Andreas. And also we were using different documents here. And here is actually the list out of the SharePoint. So we don't necessarily have to go to the SharePoint and search for the document, open it, and the next day again and again. We only need to copy it once, place it in here, and then Andreas and also I can both use the same document, and everything is stored here at one place. So our plan on how to work with it, but also our documents. So this is really, really great. Also, we recommend using all of these features here, like setting the date, giving some notes, not too much, but only what is really necessary, giving it a priority, and also setting the status. And then everything is really set for collaborating together in a really agile way until a task finally can be set here to done, where then it learns it once or twice, and that it sets automatically on done, and that gives you the great moment of success. So you, of course, don't have to copy every single wording here or every single list. Everything you need to remember is we would recommend place your goals on the left-hand side, make them visible, make your team understand that they need to be achieved. So plan yourself with tasks, thinking strategically and tactically, and then plan yourself week by week. Follow this flow here from left to the right. What tasks are still in the backlog? What are in the progress right now? Where do you need some feedback? And when it's done, you can make use of one or two of them, or get one of them out of it, or create something new. So creativity is free to use here. It's just the basic principle on how to work with OKRs in a Kanban flow. And that gives you on a very top level on how to use the technology in a human-centric way.
Cool. Thank you, Nico. That's really great stuff and nice input you just showed us there. Thanks so far. Just one quick question. This planner board, is it going to be integrated in Microsoft Teams? Is that possible?
Yeah, so although I'm currently using the web function here, it is fully integrated in Microsoft Teams. I believe every app is so it's pretty easy and straightforward and to integrate it. You must go to Documents, and then there's a big plus sign. Just click on it, and then you would see a list out of the different apps available. Click on the green sign here on that one, if you follow my mouse here, and there is a planner sign, and then you either create a new one out of scratch, or you can then just use any which you have already created, and then it's completely integrated in Teams, which is great because then everything you have to do is only stay in Teams, and you can do everything, right? Plan your team and stuff like that.
Cool, Nico. Thanks. And I can assume if I'm going to be a member of a different team, I can also collaborate on your team as well. Is that possible?
Yeah, of course. It's all totally up to you. So usually, of course, you would think that the HR team, finance team, marketing team, sales team, they all have their own planning board in order to plan their work as a team. Yes, that makes totally sense to do so. But if you're regularly working with other stakeholders together, so like cross-functionally, then of course create a team board for everybody for a certain purpose. So for example, in the marketing at our company, we just implemented a team board for marketing collaboration. So there are team members from the designers, from the graphics, from the content team, so marketing side, but also from the sales side and also from the expert side. So for those people who are consulting on our products. So it's like really diverse, and everybody's working on a whole team here together.
Cool. Thanks, Nico. Thanks for watching this webinar, and have a great evening. Bye.